It works. People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of A First Time for Everything. I apologize, my voice is definitely crackly. I've been a little under the weather, so I have tea and we're going to make it through this. Again, everybody that tunes in, please consider, leaving a star for us and our producers to let us know how much you appreciate what we're doing. Every time you contribute, you get entered into our season prize package drawing with gift cards, swag, and more. So again, we appreciate any of your love. It definitely helps us. Tonight, we are here with Ariel Dawn. And Ariel, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you write, what you've written, and where people can find you?
All right. Hello, I'm Ariel Dawn. I've been writing since 2020. I write a little bit of everything, mostly paranormal romance, monster romance, reverse harem, why choose. I don't like to be pigeonholed by one genre, so I kind of like to test them all. So, and you can find me pretty much anywhere you find books. I'm in Kindle Unlimited. I have some books that are wide. I'm hybrid published, so I'm pretty much everywhere.
Very good. Do you have a website?
I do. Ariel-Dawn.com.
Nice and simple. Yep. Sometimes people list it out and I'm like, I think I need to write that down. So the first question I'm going to ask you, actually, as you said, you started kind of in 2020. Mm-hmm. Is this something that you're saying you started kind of publishing in 2020 or you started writing? And where did you really kind of start in your lifetime with writing?
So I'm neurodivergent. I have ADHD. So like many neurodivergents, some who had grown up in special education in the system, I'd always favored reading and writing. So I've always written. I can remember writing short stories when I was really young. And when I was a teenager, I wrote poetry, probably terribly emo poetry, but, and I wrote fanfic as, a teenager as well, at the dawn of the internet. I'm showing my age here. So I've always kind of written, but because I have ADHD, and I have trouble finishing tasks, or I start a whole bunch of tasks, I'd always wanted to write a book, but I didn't think I had the discipline or like the follow through to be able to finish writing a book. So when 2020 came around, it was right before everything kind of hit. I decided that I wanted to kind of give it a shot and like try to write something new, because I'd had books on my computer that I've been writing for like 10 years that were probably never going to see the light of day, that I'd sit there and be like, one day I'm going to publish this. And I still haven't published them. But I had this idea that I was like, well, maybe if I tried to write something new, maybe if I tried to write a different story than what I've been working on. And I discovered an anthology series that was a charity anthology. And so they were taking like open submissions type thing, and they had a deadline. And I was like, well, maybe if I had a deadline, I'd, be forced to like write it and turn it in. And that's pretty much how I got started publishing. I got through writing a 18,000 word short story and was able to say that I finally did it, that I finally got published, because there was a good chunk of time before I even went through with it. I was like, well, what if I'm no good? Like, what if I suck? What if nobody wants to read my stuff? And what if this is just a terrible idea, right? What if I can't finish it? And then I always like to say and tell people it was my light bulb moment where I was like, but what if I did it anyway? What if I just did it to say that I did it, that I could finish something? And that was pretty much what got the whole ball rolling.
Nice. Now, of course, you said you started in 2020 and that was right before COVID hit. Do you feel like COVID hitting kind of forced you to really buckle down on that? Like because you were restricted from things?
Yes. So I feel like my first short story came out in April of 2020. And earlier in that year, I had decided that I was going to try to write a book because I was doing well with the short story. I had gotten it done. I had a deadline. I was like, okay, maybe we can do this. And I signed up for another anthology where I met my publisher. And she was putting out an anthology for Halloween type stories, paranormal romance, which my short story was paranormal romance. I thought, okay, if I can finish a short story, I can try to get a book. I've got this time to do it. And then obviously when everybody was stuck at home, that ended up being like my thing. Like that was what kept me going and gave me like the purpose to kind of like tune in every day and work on that. And that was my first book in the cards.
Yeah. And I like that because I mean, I went through something similar. I written when I was younger, I was a journalist and then I took a long hiatus. And then when I came back, I went nonfiction and then COVID hit and I had the same thing. 2020, I was like, I think I want to kind of do this again. And then COVID hit and I was kind of like forced to like buckle down because, you know, I worked from home. I was remote at the time, but also I really wasn't going anywhere after work. I was home a lot. And so that did really help focus in on writing and really kind of owning those processes and following through. Nothing was distracting. Now that life has gone back to somewhat normal, do you find it to be a struggle to continue, or do you feel like you set in kind of patterns at that time that have helped you move forward?
So a little bit of both, because the way that I normally am, I work in several things at once because of my ADHD. And I have the tendency to hyperfixate and really kind of like go. So in a sense, now I am a full-time author that works from home. So I do write all day. It definitely kind of did give me a feel of that, of like, this is kind of how I would, but at that time it was only one book, not like 7, you know?
Yeah.
So obviously it's changed up a little bit, but I do feel like it definitely did kind of help set the idea for me and kind of give me the idea of how I could base a routine off of it. That's been the hardest part for me. Is just this last year was a big kind of, it was a big shift for me to really kind of like map out a routine of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. So I definitely think it helped. Yeah.
I can relate to that. I think once you kind of set those patterns in your brain, it does help when life changes to still say, well, I still have to do A, B, or C, you know, this is what I do every day. So I think that really helps. Now, tell me a little bit, you said you have 7 books. Is that correct?
I have several books out.
Okay.
That's the other thing I learned in my first year writing, when I was writing in the cards. I write fast. So because I write fast and because I have ADHD and I tend to work in several books at once, I've amassed somewhere around, I think last I looked on Goodreads, it was like 55 plus titles in like 4 years.
Wow.
Now some of those were anthologies and some of them were not. But I co-write a lot. I have several series. In the Cards spawned my first mega series, which is like a Marvel universe of my own. So there's like several books to that series and they branch off and things like that. We have spinoffs. So yeah, I have several. I work in more than one book at a time. So I want to say right now I'm working in about 4 at once.
So you've mentioned that you have ADHD and you've mentioned that you're doing that. So do you find that your ADHD helps you be able to jump into multiple things like that or hurts you?
I like to say it's a blessing and a curse.
Okay.
Because last year I put out about 25 books because that's ADHD. But also there were times I was pushing deadlines right up into the deadline, and that is stressful because that's one of the things about my process is that I work very well under pressure. I always have. Light a fire under my butt and I'll get it done. I've written books in 2 weeks. I've written books in 4 days. I don't advise any of that.
Right, yeah.
So it definitely can be a blessing because I can pop into one book, and if I'm not feeling what I'm writing or I need to look at something with fresh eyes, I go work on something else. I'm able to do that. But it's also very stressful sometimes because I know that I never learn my lesson. I pile and do too much, and then I'm like, this has to be due in 3 days, you know? So it's both. It's both.
Yeah, it's interesting because I set myself self-imposed deadlines because I also work well under pressure. So if I do that, then it forces me to have to be under pressure and I'll get it done. So that's interesting that you said that because I do the same thing. Because I actually set my own deadlines like, oh, I'm going to put this out on the date. So it's gonna like, and I always short myself a little bit. My husband's like, why do you do that? I'm like, because then I get it done. Like I know me.
And I stopped doing a lot of pre-orders this year. I mean, I do still do them to an extent, but not like I was doing before. Just to kind of give myself that space to kind of like make my own, like you said, self-imposed deadlines. Nobody else knows about it. Be like, well, if I have it done by this time, then it goes to the editor. Then once I get that, I can put up the pre-order, that sort of thing. So try to like help myself kind of like keep it organized because for someone with ADHD, organization is very difficult.
Right. Yeah. So you said you're a full-time writer. And one of the things I was hearing a conversation recently at a book event, and it was there was 2 full-time writers. They were able to leave their jobs and they were writing full-time. And there's people that work full-time, which I work full-time. I'm a librarian and I write. So, my job definitely gets in the way at times. But they were kind of saying, like, because people will say, oh, well, you're lucky you get to write all day, and they were like, it's not really like that. There's a lot of other challenges that come with that. What are some of the challenges you think you face because you are a full-time writer?
I think the biggest challenge I face is probably my self-discipline and keeping myself on task. And not to say treating it like a job because it is my job, but treating it more like that I have this set amount of hours. Because I think that's one of the big challenges a lot of people have, not necessarily just writers, but people who work from home. And especially people who are self-employed, they own their own businesses. In a sense, you are your business. So it never really ends, but there needs to be like some boundary of being able to say, okay, I'm done working for the day and I'm going and I'm doing this, or I'm spending time with my family, or I'm going out and I'm doing this instead, and I'm not going to think about work. I think that is the biggest.
That's tough. Yes, especially as a writer.
And that's just it, especially as a writer, because writing is what I love and reading is what I love. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword because all I want to do is write because I love it, but I don't want to work 24/7 either and get burnt out. So,
Yeah, I worked remote for 7 years with a company, and one of the drawbacks that we said was like that you're never leaving work and you're never leaving home. You're stuck at both. And so it's really hard to set those boundaries, even with family who may not understand that, like, this is my work time, this is my free time. You sometimes don't let it be free time, and they sometimes forget that it's work time. So I definitely can respect that it's a little bit of a challenge. So do you set like kind of like, do you just free flow it during the day, or do you say, okay, I'm getting up at this time and then I start my work day, kind of like you clock in, or is it kind of like I just need to put in this amount of hours a day?
It's a little bit of both because I've tried both. Like I said, this last year has been a lot of trial and error, trying to figure out like what kind of routine works best. So I do tend to get up at the same time every day, and I come in, I put in a few hours, I make myself take a lunch. And then I go and I chill out and, touch some grass when it's warm out and, just kind of relax, do some journaling or whatever. And then I come back for a little bit. And then usually when my husband comes home, I kind of like wrap up a little bit so that, we have our time together type thing. And then I write mostly at night, like really well. So I do write during the day a little bit, but I'm much more productive at night because I'm a night owl because of ADHD, typically you have delayed circadian rhythm. So you stay up. It's like a thing. We stay up later because we don't fall asleep as fast. So I work really late. But other than that, that's kind of the way that it's morphed out over the year. So.
Okay. Yeah, totally. And I think it's really good for people to hear both sides of that. Because again, I think people have the mindset of, oh, well, you're lucky you're a full-time writer. And then realize like you have to treat it like a business and you have to treat it like a job. And it's the same as if somebody wasn't, that you have to really set these boundaries, both for your family and for your work self. It sounds like you've done that. So let's kind of go back and let's do a first. So like your first book is in the cards. Mm-hmm. So when did you first know you were going to be a writer or you wanted to? Was this when you were little or is it something that you kind of came across later in life?
I always knew that I wanted to write books. I've always been a very imaginative person, even from when I was very, very young. And I can remember even before the thought of writing a short story came to pass, I would always kind of like, because I'm a Leo, and so I'm a little bit of like, like a fantasist over here, where I would be like, imagine if somebody would interview me for a book that I wrote, like, what would I say? What would my book be about? Like the fantastical Leo ideas, right? So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind that I wanted to do that, that I wanted to write a book. And the books would change, as my life changed, as my interests changed, So really, I always kind of find it funny that it came full circle like that. And especially since I started writing, publishing, I should say, since I started publishing in 2020, just from where I started to where I am now, sitting here talking to you is mind-boggling to me. So
yeah, I love the Go Indie Now Network. I'm going to say that too. They're really supportive of upcoming authors, and obviously you've put in the work and you have a lot of books. What so you write multi-genre, obviously. What genres do you really tend to gravitate towards more, or do you have like a favorite one?
Paranormal romance, monster romance, that's my hometown, man. Those are my vibes. That's what I really love to write. But I have a tendency, because of hyperfixation and because of my personality, that I tend to get stuck in things too, or have little love affairs with different genres. Right now I am hugely into male romance, and I'm writing a ton of it. So there will probably be a lot of it coming out next year. So it just kind of varies. I do like to try all the different genres, and I like to blend genres, and I just really enjoy the craft. So
yeah, and I think growing up, I feel like books weren't kind of split into all these different genres, like specifically. But then I feel like in the last 10 years, we've really seen like this compartmentalizing of genres. And now people are resisting that and breaking out. I write what I call mixed genre. I never know exactly. Like I have a hard time at the end of our books to say exactly what genre I wrote because it's so many genres. So do you find that struggle, and how do you kind of overcome that when you have to say, this is what I write, or you have to select genres? Do you struggle with that?
I don't think I struggle with that as much as I used to, because even though I write in a bunch of different things, I kind of have the way that I cross genres. I kind of feel like I do have something for everybody. So a lot of times when people ask what I write, I'll say I write paranormal romance, monster romance, and why choose romance and urban fantasy mostly. But I also write other genres, and usually in a conversation I'll just kind of ask, be like, so what do you like to read? And based upon what that person likes to read, I will just be like, well, I have everything, so here you go. Because I really do. I also have a young adult pen name, so separate from my adult pen name where I write young adult stuff too. So I really do kind of, I think it's my interest both as a reader and a writer. Like I love to read everything, so I naturally love to write everything.
Sure. I'm the same way. So you said do you have two pen names?
Yes, two pen names. Okay. I have a third that I'm working on, but it's secret and it's not out yet.
So with the, I use one pen name and that's it. But so with the multiple pen names, do you find like that helps kind of define your readership, or do you find that sometimes it muddies the waters?
So for me, I did two separate pen names to start with. I have Ariel Dawn, who writes all adult romance, and then I have A.D. Luna, who writes all young adult romance. So I more or less separated it so that my young adult stuff wasn't crossing with my adult stuff. Even though I know there are a ton of adult, young adult readers, I just didn't want the opposite end to come into my adult books. So that was really why I did the separation of them. So I feel like for me, it's much more clearly defined. But I do have another pen name that I will be opening, hopefully in the next year, that'll be a little bit more focused on darker romance or grittier type stuff than what Ariel writes. So for the most part, I feel like for me, they kind of really help define the lines, because under Ariel Dawn, like I said, I write everything. It's very, very much kind of all across the board with spice. I have closed door romance. I have, 5-alarm fire romance. I have the in-between, I have the rom-coms. And then with the young adult A.D. Luna stuff, it's very much more, like middle grade to like high school, that type of young adult. And then I'll have the darker stuff. So
interesting. So since you have so many books out and you write under two different kind of names, you're able to kind of see, I guess, sales differently. So what would you say as far as like, what are your best sellers? What are the things that, is it YA? Is it adult? Is it certain things that you're seeing in the market that do better than others?
For me, my bestseller is Monsters of Ashwood, which is under the Ariel Dawn pen name. It has been my bestseller. It's been a little bit of a hidden gem, a little bit of a force since it came out. And I just wrapped a Kickstarter for the special edition for it. So, and I am hoping to be launching a new Kickstarter, hopefully in the next year or so, to do an audiobook for it. So, and that is a monster romance, is a dark monster, Why Choose romance. So it is definitely on the 5-alarm fire side. But I think for me, where I see the most interest is probably in that category of paranormal romance for me, and my Why Choose romances. That seems to be the bigger draw. But my Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series is also another hidden gem. My Shifters of Starfall Creek series, which is a Why Choose series that I co-wrote with Quelty Fox, is also a quiet favorite. I have quite a few of those.
Sure. So I'm a librarian, and one thing I've noticed is a lot of adults reading young adult. They just are really drawn to it for different reasons. Do you find that a lot of your young adult stuff is read by adults?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. And I love young adult stuff too, which is why I ended up writing it, because that tends to be the way that I go with things. I'm like, I really like this. I want to write my own. So yeah, I do find that that both, teenagers and the younger crowd and the adults both, they do tend to like, it's called the Aldrich Academy series by A.D. Luna. And it is very much in the vein of Harry Potter, but with a little bit of Winx, a little bit of Wednesday kind of thrown in.
Okay.
And it is a series that focuses on the two main leads, Eli and Shayna. Eli is on the spectrum, and Shayna is a little bit more outgoing. But there are a lot of there's a lot of queer representation. There's a lot of neurodivergent representation. There's the coming of age stuff. It's a really fun series that I think is really palatable for both adults and teenagers alike. So.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about diversity, since you've mentioned that you have some diversity in your books, and talk about a little bit one reasons why you chose these diversities that are in your books, and also maybe some of the challenges in not only writing it, but then I guess the readers or presenting it to the world.
So when I first started writing, when I wrote In the Cards, which is a paranormal romance, I knew I really kind of wanted to be in romance. I'd found my niche there because I love love. I love love no matter what it is. So of course, to me, I wanted to write love in all its forms. I just didn't know how to do it when I was starting, because again, grand ideas follow through a little weak. So when I first started collaborating with Quelty Fox, we wrote The Shifters of Starfall Creek together. I had never written a character who was bisexual before, but I really wanted to be able to kind of like try to, in a sense, kind of write in a different mindset, because up until that point, I had written a couple male POVs, but I hadn't written a lot. So, and that is one thing that Quell is very good at. So I kind of like to say she kind of like showed me the ropes, so to speak. And I became really attached to the character's name is Ranger. I became very attached to Ranger. And really, once I started to kind of explore writing a different type of character than what I had been used to, it really kind of felt like it opened the doors for me. And I wanted to write more of that. I wanted to kind of challenge myself and learn more and make sure that the representation in my books was accurate, that it wasn't necessarily, you know, something that, because I know that there are people out there, and I know there are out there who will kind of just like add it, but not really give much depth or give much of a genuine personality or a genuine outlook on it. And I didn't want to do that. I never want to do that. There is a lot of characters, not just in the Cards, that series, but in some of my other series as well. Representation is just really important to me. So as someone who is neurodivergent, I wanted neurodivergent leads. As someone who deals with anxiety, I wanted leads who deal with anxiety and show that in a way that is relatable. I want to say the Forevermore series and its other, you know, spin-offs, its Ava Crowley series and the Hunter Game series. I love research. I have plenty of characters who are Irish. I have characters who are Italian American. I have characters who are of Asian descent. I have characters who are openly gay, closeted gay. I have characters all across the board, because to me, we're a melting pot, and it needs to be, you know, your world reflects you to an extent too, and you reflect the world. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you kind of hit a couple key points with writing diversity is the knowledge research. And, you know, I've been a judge for writing contests. I've done different things. And one thing I can say is you can always tell someone that's done the work and the research or reached out and had sensitivity readers or beta readers that could definitely say, yes, you're on the right path. And those who didn't bother, because you definitely see it in that way where your characters almost become tropey, which I hate, you know. Hate that. So yeah, I think a big importance. I'm a research whore. I'll just say that I have to stop myself.
Yeah. Fall down rabbit holes. My favorite was I fell down a rabbit hole. I think it was in the Shadows, which is part of the Forevermore series. Part of it takes place in the 1920s, which again, I did a lot of research for, you know, the tongs and the gangs and things and prohibition and all the stuff, right? And as I was delving into some of the lingo, like the things, you know, the linguistics and phrases, common, like, you know, slang and stuff, I was looking for cures for hangovers in the 1920s. And one of the, I fell into this rabbit hole of, I was like, I came out later and I was like, did you know that a Bloody Mary was considered a cure for hangovers? It's my favorite. I just like, and I looked up and I was like, whoa, it's been 2 hours since I've been in this rabbit hole, but all right.
Yeah, that's my problem too. And I always have to say, like, I have to set timers because I will get down rabbit holes too. Like, I was doing research on time travel and it never ends. Like, you just keep reading. And eventually I looked up and like, it had been 2 hours. I'm like, I can't believe I just spent 2 hours.
And you're like, you put it in a single line.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of talking on that, what has been like reader response to your stories in the sense of diversity? Have you gotten any feedback, positive or negative, on what you've written?
I can't say I've gotten anything specific. Usually the feedback is pretty good. I have had quite a few people who told me that they felt that my representation of some of the queer characters in my books was done very well and very genuinely, which makes me feel really good.
Yeah.
And also another thing I try to portray in several of my books is positive kink as well, because that's another thing that really kind of grinds my gears, that sometimes people don't do their research or they they tropify it without completely understanding it. So I try to represent things like that, in a positive, informative light as well. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from others about how they had felt reading certain books. I think Hades was a really popular one. Excuse me, which is part of the speed datings with the denizens of the underworld series. And it deals with some BDSM type stuff in there, on the lighter side, but still, in there. And I had several people, including, I think, one of the girls from the We're Reading Dirty Books podcast, told me that she felt like reading it really kind of in the informative way that I did it, in the genuine way that I did it, made her feel safer, that she could kind of like understand it or maybe want to explore it herself and kind of give her like some groundwork to go off of, which was like huge. I was like, oh, thank you. That is like amazing, So I definitely feel like I've gotten some feedback, even if it's not as consistent, probably as other people, but I have heard it. So
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit I want to talk about kink and fetishizing, because I think that there's a difference, and a lot of writers don't understand that difference. Sometimes they fetishize something that is not, like, like talk about male to male romance. I see a lot of times where writers then become fetishizing, and then they're not really respecting the characters or the culture. So how do you find that line, and how do you make sure that what you're doing doesn't do that?
I think for me, because I approach, no matter what kind of book I'm writing, no matter what pairing I'm writing, I approach it all kind of the same way, where in my head, obviously I see my characters, but it's more about the personalities, and it's more about the traits that you're attracted to rather than the person. So whether I am writing a male-female romance, or whether I am writing a male-male romance, or whether I'm writing, a poly romance, I kind of approach it the same way. My characters feel very real to me. So I don't want to say I model them after real people, but I imagine them as real people. Like I imagine them in my life, like as a friend, and I know so many people that I can, obviously draw traits from, but I try to envision my characters as if they were real people, and I try to write them as if they were real people, because to me, in a sense, they are real. They're the voices in my head, but but I feel like that's how you relate to a character. You want to relate to a character because you want to feel like you have something in common with them, whether that be a trait or whether that be, that you like the same pizza, you want to be able to connect to them, so they have to feel real. So to me, they are real, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's all about character development. I always say that, like, no matter what, character development is like the first and primary thing you need to make sure you're good at before you do anything else, because if you fail at that, you failed at everything else. So yeah, making those characters real. So let's talk about kind of getting into, so once you first published and you had stuff out there, started getting feedback, was there a time that you got negative feedback? And if so, was it something that you were able to kind of glean from and learn from? Or was it, sometimes it's just petty and you can't, but do you feel like you ever got feedback that you were able to say, okay, I see what they're saying, let me pay attention to that?
Absolutely. For better or for worse, I am a former art student. So I have had my share of sitting in, college rooms and having my work completely trashed. So I'm very good at taking, most of the time, constructive criticism. I realize that not every book is going to be for everybody. And that is 1,000% okay, because not every book out there is for me, right?
Right.
So I try to approach it, when I do get negative feedback, I try to see if there is anything that I can take from it that is constructive, or if it's just this book wasn't for that person. And there's also kind of a fine line too, because I know that a lot of people feel like reviews aren't for authors, they're for readers. And to an extent they are, but I read my reviews constantly. I probably shouldn't, but I read them constantly. Because for me, my reviews are not just, yes, they are the things that keep me going when I'm having those days of imposter syndrome. But also, I do try to see if there are things that maybe people aren't getting, or maybe that I could work on a little bit more, to make sure that they are getting, or to hit the audience that I want, or, to make sure that things land. So I do kind of feel like I have had a couple here or there. Most of it was, I think, just down to taste. I had a 1-star review one time on Monsters of Ashwood, the first book, Voices in the Dark. And I could tell that the book just wasn't for them. You can just tell sometimes, you know. And one of the things that I think they had said that they were cheesed about was that there was a lot of emphasis on consent, which they were happy because, again, consent is sexy.
Yeah.
So they were happy about that, but they didn't like all the breeding kink stuff. So they were not happy about it. And they gave me a 1-star review. I took that 1-star review and I made a promotional graphic out of it because there are 100 other people who would see that as a 5-star review.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because I see that where it's like someone trashes something and someone goes, well, that sounds good to me. You're like, no, I want to read it.
Like, I got that review, and most people, I feel like sometimes who would get a 1-star review would be like crying in the corner. And I was like, I made it. I got a 1-star review.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to roll with it. And it sounds like you do. So kind of along those lines, though, I really feel like we learn as much from our mistakes as we do from the successes.
We do.
Have you had any mistakes along the way of this process that you have learned from and you're kind of glad you went through so you could say, aha, let me do this now?
I think probably one of the big ones is starting books and not finishing the series. That was a big one. Because when I started and I put out In the Cards, I really, at that point, didn't think that I was going to be here 4 years later with all these series that are open. And I didn't foresee at the time In the Cards becoming this gigantic world. So as I wrote the second book, In the Blood, which is not available anymore because it's being rewritten to fit in with some other books in the world. But at the time I had written In the Blood, and I just kind of like, you know, was making it up as I go along, right? And then after In the Blood was okay, and we got, you know, ended up with my publisher, and I wrote the next couple books in the series. I didn't necessarily like have a plan. So I feel like because I went through that in that first series, once I got to the other ones and started writing others, it kind of was like the groundwork for that, where I was like, okay, I need to finish a series at a time. Because I have so many that are open and are in the process of being finished. But I also realized that too, how I write, the process of how I write, and how some of those books, you know, in the beginning were much more pantsed. And now I'm kind of a little bit more of like in the middle of a pantser and a plotter. I'm like a plotster.
Yeah.
Both. So I definitely think I learned a lot from that experience of having that first book, that first series, that kind of really gave me, you know, the vantage point to be like, okay, you need to be a little bit more organized, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's kind of more sense how I write now. So.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because my next question was actually in reference to plotter versus pantser.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much are you a plotter or a pantser, but rather, since you have so many things that you're working on, since you have multiple series and you have a lot of books that you're working on, and you're a plotzer, we'll say that you're kind of in between. How do you stay organized, and how do you keep your characters organized and your worlds organized so that when you jump in, it's not having to like reset or refresh every time?
So it's a 2-part answer, because it depends on if I'm co-writing or if I'm writing by myself. If I'm co-writing, I'm a lot more organized. And there's an accountability aspect, I think, sometimes to co-writing, because I have to have my chapter done so the next person can work. So there's like a little bit more of, you know, like, all right, we have our info sheets, we have our profiles, we have like our series Bible, like we have everything down to a T. And, you know, you write your chapter, I write my chapter, we're good. I'm much more organized when it comes to co-writing. When it comes to my own stuff, I don't have series Bibles. I just know. I have sheets of paper that I write notes. Like it's horrendous. It's not as organized. I do have documents, and I do have like timelines and things that I keep abridged. But a lot of times, especially if it's an open series like the Ava Crowley series or the Hunter Games series, I have my books. I stick them with Post-it notes. That's literally my system. It's like
whatever works.
I know it looks, but like that's how I do it. And then I'm able to kind of like go back and because I have those copies of those books. So I think it definitely depends. I'm a lot more organized when I'm working with other people. When it comes to me, I'm just like fly by the seat of my pants, but I get it done. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I write mostly standalone, but I wrote a book, and then one of the minor characters told me that he needed a book, so he got a book, and then now another character is telling me. So it unintentionally became a series. So I'm having to backtrack and try to do those notes and that organization, and what a nightmare I'm going through right now. Because I didn't start out knowing it was going to be serious. I didn't start out making notes or kind of following through. So now I'm having to go back and try to pull out of books and like, what did I say there? Did I say his eyes? How old is he? That type of thing. So do you know that you're writing a series when you start, and do you organize that way? Or are you kind of like, oh, now it's going to be a series. I got to go back and read what I wrote.
So now I kind of know ahead of time that I'm going to make a series. I plot it out as a series now. I always like to say when I started, my initial first couple books were In the Cards was the first book, In the Blood was the second, In the Shadows, In the Deep, and In the Garden. So those were like the first 5 of that Forevermore series. And I like to say that I George Lucased myself because I wrote In the Blood first, and In the Blood had taken place 7 years. Like Ava and Cassius had been like going back and forth for 7 years, and that was the end of the story, right? And people loved them so much, and there was so much potential there that I was like, well, I'm going to go back and tell their story from the beginning, which is how we ended up with the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series. But then as I was writing those books, I realized how much more there was there, and it became kind of like bigger than what I thought it was going to be. Which is why we pulled In the Blood, and it is no longer available. It is being rewritten as a book called Blood and Fate, which will be part of the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series. And the original book, In the Blood, had been written from Ava's point of view. All the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer books are written from both of their point of views. So that new rewrite will get Cassius's point of view, and I know fans are going to be seething when they read it because they all love Cassius so much. And that book is just it's a good one. So I know that once we get that rewritten and kind of put it back out, it'll fit better than it did before. So, but yeah, I definitely think nowadays, because I have that experience there with that. I definitely know when I sit down and I'm plotting something out, I'm like, this is going to be multiple books, or this is going to be, a standalone. I definitely can feel that more now ahead of time, where in the beginning, I didn't know until I would be like halfway through the book. I would be like, well, I guess this is going to be more than one book.
I've gotten to the point where I didn't know until after the book was published, and then people were like, you're going to write another one, right? And I'm like, I can. Like, I didn't think about that. Mm-hmm. So talking about series, like, do you write, 2 questions. Mm-hmm. Do you write consecutively, chronologically, like you start at the beginning and you work your way through, or do you kind of jump around through whoever's, like you decide, I want to tell this person's story, I want to tell this person's story. And then do you also know how it's going to end or when it's going to end, or is that something that it kind of just continues to unfold?
So I think for me, I write pretty linearly now. I used to kind of puzzle piece things together, but now I write much more linearly. And for me, I feel like I kind of, with certain series, I kind of know where they're going to end. There are series like Monsters of Ashwood. When I wrote the first book, I didn't really know it was going to be a second book, but then I kind of thought, well, people seem to really like it, so I'm going to write a second. And before I had even released the first one, people were asking for the sequel. Yeah. So I moved up what it was going to be. It was going to come out, I think, in March of that following year, and I moved it up to January. The first book came out in October. So I didn't know when I was writing that until probably about halfway through, and in alphas and stuff, that it was probably going to be a second book. Whereas nowadays, I'm more or less like, yeah, I know, I can feel it.
So do you also write standalones?
I have a couple that are standalones. I tend to write more in series because I get really attached to my characters and my worlds, and so. But I do have quite a few standalones. So.
And what do you feel? What do you feel does better? I've been kind of watching this over the last year and talking to readers just to get a feeling for things, and it's really hard. Like I feel like series are definitely kind of the thing right now. People are really drawn to it because they want same thing. They want to immerse themselves in those characters in those worlds. Do you find that your series do better?
I think it depends on what genre you're in. I really do. Like for me, I feel like because I read a ton of male romance. I feel like standalones for that are very good. Not to say that series don't work as well, because you can clearly see by my Goodreads that I have been binging series. But I definitely see the standalones doing really well there. But then I switched to something like paranormal romance where my standalones don't do as well as my series. It just really kind of, I think, depends on the genre.
That's really fascinating. And I think that's really good information for people out there because I wouldn't have thought about that, but you're right. I think there are stories that horror tends to do well standalone. People aren't really like you kind of have in that moment. It's very hard, I think, when you are writing horror to find a way to continue that. Where I do think when you talk about like paranormal romance or romance in general, people tend to want more of those people. They want to know what's going on. But it is interesting, which is about male-to-male romance, because I find the same is that people that's a complete story to them. It's not necessarily something that they need to continue on.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is. So now I'm going to have to like think about that because I want to know why.
Or there's even like the series of standalones, like that they're like, they're connected, but they're not connected.
That's what I write. Yeah. Mine aren't like series. Like when I say that, the books I have, I always say like they share characters. When people come up, I'm like, they're like a series. I'm like, it shares characters. Like you could read one or you could read all three once the other one's written, when you can read them out of order. It doesn't matter. Where a series, I think, tends to have more of a flow to it.
Yes.
It's expected. Like this is book one, this is book two. Do you find when you're writing a series versus say that shared character idea, do you find that your readers are going to read it from beginning to end? Or do you find like you maybe have to not over explain? But like when I write the shared characters, I do have to over-explain in each book because I know that I'm selling them as one book or they can buy all three. Do you find you have to do that with the series?
I don't. I tend to, because I try to remember just in general, like, because I always try to remember myself as a reader, right? Because I started this whole world as a reader before I even like wrote my story in the cards. I was a book talker. Like I was a bookstagrammer. And I remember, how I would review books or how I would pick up books. So I always kind of try to keep that in the back of my mind that like when I'm writing a book, whether it's a series or a standalone or whatever, that I'm not just trying to appeal to my audience, but I'm trying to appeal to a broader audience too, because somebody might pick up my book, and not know what, they might pick up the third book in the series. So and have to start, and I've had several readers do that. When it comes to Ava Crowley and the Hunter Games, they are two separate series, but you can read them together as one giant series. And so there are people who maybe read Ava who didn't realize that, the Hunter Games were a series and they picked up the third book, and then kind of have to go back. So I do try to not like overdo it when I'm writing a book in the series, but I do kind of try to like recap a little bit, or just kind of like explain a little bit away just in case, because that is always in the back of my mind, that somebody might pick up like the second or third book and be like in the middle and not have any idea what's going on. So
and I've done that. I mean, I've bought books, say I've gone to say Goodwill and I find a book and it looks appealing to me and I get home and I'm reading it and I'm like, I'm confused, and then I realize it was part of a series and they don't really explain. So it's not something you could read by itself. If you didn't read those first two books, you have no clue what's going on. And that's where as an author, I really try to say, okay, what happens if somebody gets my book somewhere and it's number 3 or number 4? I want to make sure that they are getting a good, solid story, regardless of the rest of it. And then hopefully they'll find the rest and that's great. But I think that's really important, is to make sure that we respect the reader's understanding of what's going on, and not just be like, you don't know who this is or what's happened. But so we talk about plotters and pantsers. One of the things that I'm always curious about with people is kind of, are you a clinger or are you a releaser? In the sense of, once you've done a book and you put it out there, do you cling on to it a little bit, or do you just say, yep, I've done what I can do, and you release it to the world?
I kind of am a little bit of a releaser. For me, I cling more in the editing stage. So like, because a lot of times by the time that I've put everything out there, like once I submit my stuff to editing, like I don't look at it again until it literally comes out.
Wow.
So for me, once everything is done, it's done. And then I just release it and I'm like, have at it. And then I'll go back and read it later, is what I tend to do. After
Do you actually go back and read it after it's out there? So I can't. I'm so afraid I'm going to find something major.
I do. A lot of times what happens too is I'll be going back through and I'll be reading because I'll want to pull stuff for teasers or, or just in general for interviews, that sort of thing, or like live reads. And then I'll go back and then I'll get stuck, and then I'll just kind of like fall back into the rabbit hole and I'll read it.
Yeah.
This happened quite a few times. And there are times because it's almost like I get to read it as a fresh reader because I haven't seen it in so long too. So
yeah, that's true. So you're talking a little bit about, you were a big book talker before you did this. So let's talk a little bit about marketing. What do you feel for you has been your best marketing tools?
For me, I like to think that my best marketing tools have always been social media from the time I started to even now. I just, for me, I don't know if you can tell, I have a winning personality over here. I like to be in the same space, not necessarily as my readers, but because I am a reader too. So for me, I think my biggest success with marketing has been that I am the, if I can do it, you can do it person. I am a reader as much as I am a writer. So I connect with my readers through social media. And I feel like that has been probably like the biggest for me from the get-go. As far as other types of marketing, I've always been kind of a hidden gem. I continue to be a hidden gem, and that is fine with me. Nightmare Before Christmas was once considered a cult classic before it was widely available as well. So, so maybe that'll be me. But I kind of feel like I've always kind of been in the background, but I'm in a sense okay with that. Because I have my little pocket of people. I have my fans. I see them all the time when they come up to me at events. So I definitely feel like social media has been the big one for me.
Nice. So one of my favorite things to ask people, because I love art, I love music, I love reading. That's kind of what inspires me. What inspires you? And you be specific. What inspires you as far as to be a writer, to kind of delve in? What makes you really feel like you're finding your place, whether it's art, music, reading, all of it, any of it?
I think what inspires me more than anything, and it's been my entire life of it, is just the beauty of love. I've always been like a dreamer, and I've always been a romantic. So for me, I'm inspired by just people and love and like the world, because I see the world differently. Most neurodivergent people do, most writers do, right? And I'm a very emotional person, so I like to hold on to things. And I'm a very sensory person, so I like to immerse myself in things. So I always like to say I find inspiration pretty much everywhere. When I was in art school, I had a photography teacher who told me one time, any good photographer can look 10 feet in front of them and take a good picture. And I kind of apply that in a sense to writing as well. In the way that I observe the world, 10 feet in front of me, I can write a story. If that makes sense. So I go on vacation places. I went to the Outer Banks a couple of years ago, and I was just staying in a bed and breakfast. And the entire time I was there, I was writing stories in my head about the little girl coming downstairs who claimed that she could see ghosts. And her dad's like, yeah, okay, Karen. And she's like, no, really. you know, and I had fabricated like a whole story around this family that I just saw like at breakfast every morning. Like, so I'm inspired everywhere that I go. And it's just those little things, those little details, you know, just sitting at the coffee shop and, you know, just watching people in a non-creepy way.
No, I
you
totally
know,
relate.
but like those little things, or like just the sound of rain on the roof. Like I'm inspired by the little things, by the life, the love. So
Yeah, I love that because I'm the same way when people ask me, well, you know, how do you come up with your story ideas? And I'm like, how don't I? Like, it's everywhere. Could walk the
Bless
dog,
you.
I'd be taking out the trash,
Mhm.
like whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's
Yeah.
just something will pop in my head. So I love that because I'm very much the same way.
Mhm.
All right, we're gonna do the wheel. So let me
Okay.
do that real quick. All right, let me close this and let me close this. Okay, spin the wheel and we'll see what comes up. Oop, first date.
First date. Oh God. That's gonna be like a super long time ago. I feel like okay, I feel like my first date was, don't laugh at me, it was Toys R Us.
I like that.
I was dating a guy that I had met online. He lived in New Jersey, so he got on the bus and came all the way up here to Pittsburgh, where I live. And we were young, so we didn't have much to do. So we literally went to Toys R Us, I think, and played video games.
That's so awesome. I remember doing that with like more like friends, like, you know, but we'd go and like get on the bouncy balls, you know, like with the handles, and we
Just like walked around Toys R Us and like played the demo video games and like hung out because there's nothing in my town except a mall, you know?
Yeah. And when you're young, you're broke, so you're like, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, totally. I was trying to think if my first date, I honestly probably mine was a bad decision. I was young and went with a much older college guy, so not a good decision. So I'll just leave it at that. I made bad decisions. Okay, let's do one more spin.
Okay. First hobby.
First hobby.
What more like what isn't my hobby? But probably my first hobby was, I was gonna say, probably collecting. I grew up going to flea markets and collecting stuff, collecting books, collecting dolls, cards. Cards were like a huge thing, like, you know, in the 90s, collected a ton of cards. So I'd say my first hobby was probably collecting.
That's cool. My first hobby, I was a horse girl. I really wanted a horse when I was little. So I had horse everything, horse magazines, those little Briars horses just all over my room. I had horse
Love the Briars
everything.
horses.
Never had a horse. Because when I became an adult and I realized how expensive horses were, I was like, yeah, I'm good. So yeah, that was pretty much the end of it. I still love horses, but I'll never own one. So yeah. Well, awesome. I'm so glad you came on tonight. So why don't you tell everybody again where they can find you, and if you have any other upcoming events or anything you'd like people to know about.
Sure. So you can find me at ariel-dawn.com. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. Those are my big ones. But I'm pretty much everywhere. Goodreads, like you name it. You can find my books pretty much everywhere as well. I have several books in Kindle Unlimited. I have several books that are wide. So I have some stuff that's, you know, in Barnes & Noble, all those other places. Upcoming projects. What am I not working on? There will be, I'm currently working on the 4th book in the Hunter Games series. I'm hoping to get that done as soon as possible. So we have a lot more books in the Hunter Games series and the Ava Crowley series, which are the spinoffs from the Forevermore series from in the cards. I have a whole bunch more in that world coming out. Next year, I believe I have several male romances coming out. I have a couple continuations of series. I will be doing a bunch of events. So I will be back at Romanticon next year. I'll be back at Getting Witchy next year, Flirty in Tampa, as well as a few other new places as well. So including, I think, Lore Makers in February is my first one, Dreaming Dirty in Michigan. So I'll be around. I'll be writing like crazy, pumping out books, going to events.
And you said you have a website. Do you have both of your pen names on your website?
I do.
Okay.
They're both up there. So.
And do you list your events on your website?
I do. I am currently working on confirming my schedule right now, so it should be out before Thanksgiving. Telling you all the fun places that I'll be, so you can come hang out with me.
Very cool. And remind everybody what your website is again.
Ariel-Dawn.com.
All right, so everybody can find you there, and are your social media links there as well?
Yes, they are.
Perfect. Yep. So you can find her there and find everything. So you're able to do that. And we again appreciate you coming on the show. This has been a really great chat. My voice held out, which was impressive. So we did really good there. And for everybody that tuned in, we really appreciate you tuning in tonight. And please check out Ariel wherever she might be. And just remember, it's always time for Go Indie Now.